I don't know why I'm humming that or saying that, but welcome back to another video. It's Nick again, and today we're going to talk about a couple different things. Part of it is going to be shilling some courseware. So for those of you guys who've been following the channel for a little while now, you know that I've been working on a Linux course, and that is going to be something I'm delivering initially for the Air Force here in the U.S. Week after next. Right? So I'm in the pretty final phases of that. Got basically all of the kind of slides and the courseware done. Basically, I'm just working on labs and a couple things for the troubleshooting modules. So the first thing I need help on is right now I've got the name of the course is Linux Basics, which is not a very good name. That's what it is. It's basically for the Linux Professional Institute, LPI, baseline certification, the Linux Essential certification. So it's basic stuff. It's getting around a Linux system. It's using the files, file system. It's what are the config files? What are the basic commands? Getting around in Bash, desktops, that kind of stuff. And some shell scripting. So I was trying to think of a better name. So if you have any good suggestions, if you can think of anything particularly interesting or creative or a good name for it, let me know, and I'll give you a shout out in one of the subsequent videos if you are the person who comes up with a good name. I was thinking of something along the lines of like the Karen feeding of a Linux system or something like that. I don't know. I am not a creative writer. I'm good at teaching things. But anyway, so I thought what I'd do is kind of just jump over to my desktop over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my sort of student guide and just kind of point this out. So this is, I've got to sort of clean up the table of contents for whatever reason. It's not sort of rendering fantastically. But this is just EPUB. Weirdly, whatever you get to say about the Edge browser, surprisingly good at dealing with EPUB. Like it's a fairly decent little EPUB reader, which kind of surprised me. So if I kind of jump through here, scroll through all the table of content stuff. I thought I had the actual page numbers sort of listed out, but this is like about 200 pages at this point, which is kind of crazy. I think it's a little bit over that. So, what I'll probably also do is release this as an ebook or something along those lines. Perhaps I definitely am going to be doing a course based on this, but I want this to be accessible for folks who can't necessarily afford to take an in-person class with me. So I'm gonna sort of work that out. I'll probably maybe do a video-based class, and kind of go into it. So what I thought I would do is to jump over to the networking section, and so this is what the sort of slide deck will kind of look like when I go through it. I'm going to go jump over to the DNS section. And, I know this is going to be something that's really basic for most of you guys, but I thought what I'd do is just sort of talk about DNS kind of generally and a couple of the utilities that you can go use to look, check things out with DNS, make sure that it's working, things like that along those lines for new users, right? People who are fairly new to this. And the place to start is in the beginning, generally, right? So the hosts file is a good spot to talk about. And the host file has been around for ages. If you look in one of my other videos, one of the things that you'll notice is I've got one on using the etc host files to prevent distractions, because this is going to be the first thing that's looked up before it checks DNS. So if it finds an entry in DNS, it'll check that out first. Really simple format. Basically, you've got the IP address that you want to go use. You've got the host name. And then you've got an alias if you'd like to go ahead and use that. Right, so make that a little bit bigger for you guys. So the process of how DNS works is something I think a lot of times people who are relatively new to IT and technology don't really completely get. They think like a name server has all of the records on it. And basically what it does is sort of jumps through this kind of flow where initially you are going to go ahead and come in. Why is that not? Huh, weird. Oh, I know it. I know why that's not working. So you, let me clear this off. I've got a VM, the Wacom tablets associated with the VM right now. It's the whole thing. Anyway, so you get you. You're going to go ahead and do a query. Your machine is going to go ahead and query your name server, right? And your name server is then going to go ahead and talk to the top level domain for whatever the TLD for that is, so .com or .org or .xyz or whatever it is, right? So it's going to go ahead and look up some domain, and some domain is going to have some name server records. It's then going to go ahead and connect to those name servers, and then that's where it's going to go look up the host name. So it has a whole bunch of sort of different steps that it goes through. This is sort of a simplified kind of diagram of that because it's actually going back and forth each time. So there's a decent amount of communication between your name server and whatever it is that you're trying to look up. And that's important to realize because if you're trying to kind of figure out a problem with DNS, it may not be as simple as sort of it seems initially. So basically when we have a DNS configuration, regardless of whether this is a Linux machine or not, it's going to be configured in a couple different ways. By far the most common on desktops is going to be DHCP. And then when you go ahead and configure an interface, which is something we talk about, as a different part of the section, different part of this section, but we're not going to go over for this bit. We look at the interfaces and the configuration, and we look at network manager and all that kind of stuff. So there's a number of different ways that you can go ahead and configure it for getting DHCP. Generally, it'll work out of the box if you're using something like an Ubuntu or Fedora or things like that. That's going to default to that for your Wi-Fi and for your standard Ethernet kind of stuff. But we can also go ahead and manually configure DNS. Right. So generally speaking, this is done in the etc resolv.conf file. And it's really, really simple to do. There's just a couple entries, and basically that's it. So you've got name server and then the IP address of your name server. If you notice here, I've got two entries. That's because you really never wanted to just have one. And, DNS is obviously a critical thing. There are some exceptions that if you're using like a load balanced IP address or something like that, where that this is going to be up. And then we have the search domain, which basically just lets you do something like ping foo. And really what it is it's foo.mydomain.com or whatever that is. So it's a little bit outside of the scope of the class that I'm going to be teaching, but I put it here just because it's, I don't know exactly what the level of people are going to be. And for folks that are interested, they might want to look more about this. One of the things that we're seeing, in recent days with Linux is systemz's sort of encroach on everything. And I'm fairly neutral on systemd. But there's some things that it just seems crazy to me that we're going to go ahead and build like a name caching stuff and ownership of the resolv.conf into systemd now. It's one of the reasons why more and more and more I'm sort of leaning towards the BSDs because while I appreciate a lot of the functionality that systemd is giving us, the ability to go ahead and have sort of a watchdog process for services and have the idea of C groups and things like that, and those are all well and good, none of them really require systemd. There are very good alternatives to doing that kind of stuff without it. And this whole, I guess it's just because there's effectively, aside from the small number of people out there using BSD, and the smaller number of people using Solaris and AIX and those kind of things, effectively Linux is the big dog now. So whatever they say Unix is what Unix is. But it just kind of annoys me because it sort of is breaking kind of backwards compatibility and stuff. So anyway, it's getting a little bit off topic, but it's kind of a weird thing. And for those of you guys who haven't played around with things like FreeBSD at all, check it out. If you're Linux people, especially if you've been doing this for a while, it's really not that bad to set up. Getting the GUI configured and all that kind of stuff. If you're on some obscure hardware, you might need to go look up how to go configure your network card. But if you were doing this stuff 15 years ago, it's the same thing we had to go do with Linux. And also, if you go look at some of the newer versions of TrueOS, which used to be called PCBSD or GhostBSD, they're pretty good in terms of just being, configured sort of for like desktop usage, just right out of the box and ready to go. But you don't have all this kind of crazy stuff with systemd to kind of bug you down. Anyway, so this is referred to the man systemd resolv.service. If anybody's interested in that, you can go read up all about it. At this point, you're generally not recommended to edit the resolv.conf directly. You're supposed to go look at one of the the stub files, which then in turn configured, or you're going to go change the default configuration. That's a whole thing. So anyway, one of the first commands that we want to go ahead and look at when we're doing troubleshooting stuff is the host command. This can go ahead and do forward lookups and reverse lookups. So it can go ahead and translate a host name into an IP address or an IP address into a host name. I've got some examples here, but generally what I'll do in real life is just sort of demo stuff. So, I've got a SUSE box here set up. I'm running Window Maker, but run whatever you want. And if we go ahead and make this a little bit bigger, right, we can then go ahead and maximize this. Right, we can then go ahead and do something like actually make this fit more over here. All right. We can do a host 8.8.8.8. And that's just Google's public DNS. So we can go ahead and see that over here. Actually, let me just make this bigger so I can go ahead and do that. Did that not resize? Oh well. I just reloaded this this VM because it was having some problems. So I'll ignore that for right now. But you can go ahead and see that this is a pointer to Google Public DNS, right? We can also go ahead and do a search for google.com. Oh, if I can type correctly. We can go ahead and see that it's got a whole bunch of entries there that get smaller. There we go. That are going to go ahead and translate to what google.com resolves to. So one thing that's worth noting is that this is going to go and show us, IP address and IP4 as well as IP6. You can also go ahead and see that there's going to be sometimes multiple addresses responded with. And given that this class is something that's geared towards users, probably not something that we really need to worry about, but that can be really useful for something called GSLB or Global Server Load Balancing. You return multiple entries, and basically the one that gets returned the most is where most of your traffic goes to. It's not perfect, but when you're dealing with large scale things at worldwide data center level, it's actually a pretty decent way of going and doing it. So a lot of times what you'll do is you'll actually see multiple IP addresses listed out here as well. Right. So older command that we used to have is called Nslookup. Sometimes it's installed, right? You can go ahead and do, google.com. If I can type, and you can go ahead and see that it's got a slightly different, syntax to the output, but it does basically the same things. And that's just worth noting because sometimes people are coming from Windows, and Windows, I believe, still has an Nslookup command that you can go ahead and use, right? So host generally is the sort of way that we do things now. The other thing we can go ahead and do is we can go look for types of entries. So I can do a host-t mx, and I can look up the mx records or the mail servers, mail recipients for a domain. So if I go ahead and look up my domain, nicholasbernstein.com, I can go ahead and see that I've got mx1 and mx2 are my mail servers, right? So those are the ones that are going to be handling incoming mail for me. And we can also go ahead and look up different kinds of entries. So I can go ahead and look at TNS to go look at my name server records. And you can go ahead and see that these are at domaincontrol.com. So yeah, that's the whole thing. I gotta move off, GoDaddy one of these days, but it's been there for a while. So yeah, you can look up name server records. There's other types as well. So I can do host-t text to go ahead and look up text records. And if any of you guys ever want to go ahead and run your own mail server, that's actually an important thing to know, because some of the ways that we fight against spam are tied pretty closely to DNS. So for example, I've got an SPF record. An SPF record basically says who is allowed to send mail for the nicholasbernstein.com domain. We can also go ahead and do things like look at DNS security and stuff like that as well, to basically have signed DNS records, so that they haven't been tampered with and so forth. So that's basically the host command, and it works really, really nicely. The next big command to sort of look at when trying to go ahead and figure out what's going on with DNS is the Digg command. And the Digg command is messy. And it's a good command, but it's one of the things I think that sometimes when people are new to this, they look at the output from Digg and they're like, this is just more than I really need for most things. So what I did is I showed this with the Digg-t any, and basically this is one of the more common uses of the Digg command. Basically pull down all the known information from DNS, right? So pull down all the name service records, all the MS records, all the A records, and so forth. So it's going to go ahead and pull down, all that kind of stuff, right? So pull down kind of any record that you have. My environment's pretty small. It's basically just, my one server, right, for nicholasbernstein.com, right, and then my secondary MX, and that's basically it. So it's a nice command for that. But there's other stuff that we can go ahead and do with this as well. So if I go ahead and man Digg, you can go see that there's a bunch of different options that they have. So we can go look at the type, things like that. We can also go ahead and specify a particular server. That's something we can go do with the host command as well. So if I do host nicholasbernstein.com 1.1.1.1, which is another public DNS, we can go ahead and look it up from that server, as opposed to my normal server, which is going to be, just my local, DNS server on my local network. So it's the same thing either way, but we can go specify that. And we can go ahead and do something like Digg, at 8.8.8.8, nicholasbernstein.com. And we can, remove the man part of that. And we can go ahead and see sort of the default output that we get with Digg. So you can go ahead and see that it gives us information about, when this was sent, various kind of metadata about, how long it took, right? The answer to the thing, right? The message size, all that kind of stuff, right? So, that's a decent command. There's also, if you go look at the man page, there is a simple option as well, which I always forget. I think it might just be -s. But you can go get the simplified version of the output. I'm not going to search for it now, but it might just be like Digg. Keep putting man pages on there. No? Okay. Oh, well. No, oh well. There's, it's in there somewhere if you care. But the idea is we jump back over here, right, to our slides. You can go until we get this sort of Digg command, this example. But we can also go ahead and do things like plus trace. I think that's probably the way that we did it. Let's do this. No, oh well. So this is tracing the flow of a DNS lookup. So if we go back to the diagram that we looked at before, we can actually get some pretty good stuff from that. So if I do dig google.com plus trace, right, it's going to go dump out a lot of information. And a lot of this is going to be the security information. So we're going to go ahead and see DNS key information. So if I do a grep vrsig, all right, I can go ahead and get rid of that. So this is much more readable. All right, so basically what we can do is we can trace the lookups that we went through, right? So you can see here, this is where our command starts, the previous one. We basically have the initial lookup where we go to our root name servers, right? So we have to go figure out where those guys are, right? And we're then going to go back and come back in here, right? So we're then going to go ahead and have the response from, in this case, 198.41.0.4 for the google.com name servers, right? That takes us down to actually get connected to them. And then we get the response from one of those servers that we are, in fact, going to resolve google.com as 216.58.217.61. So this is a fairly neat thing. And if we go ahead and did a search for like, the sort of name server records or things like that, we could, trace the kind of flow of some more complex things. And if you guys watched the video that I did yesterday, right, not yesterday, but previously, where we talked about the dot command, and we'll be able to go ahead and use GraphViz to go ahead and create these dynamic graphs. Basically, what I did is I just grepped out information for the servers that we used to go do lookups, and then I put it into a dot file, just munged the text a little bit, and then had it automatically generate this graph, which was kind of a neat little thing. So you can see the first lookup was to 1.1.1.1 because we queried the, that name server, right? That gave us our response for what the root name servers were, and then we kind of went through that kind of flow. So first we went to, the JRoot server, and then we went to GTLD, global top level domain server.net, right? That could responded back as the one we're going to do the lookup on. And that directed us to ns42.domaincontrol.com, which was authoritative for my domain, and then that returned the nicholasbernstein.com host name. So that was basically the process. Now here I said it was going to localhost. I'll probably need to go update for that for the course because it was actually going to, actually in this case it is. So those responses are going to localhost, but it's generally going to go to your name server, right? So that's it for the kind of basic kind of introduction to some of the different tools you can go use for DNS. I realize that that's probably not going to be something that most of you guys will need. And you certainly don't need to learn about ping. I'm sure that most of you guys need that. But this is geared towards the Linux Professional Institute LPI Essentials, Linux Essentials exam. So basically there's a set of weighted priorities. So we're going to go over all the kind of stuff that's, in that class for people who want to get that certification. So somebody who is brand new to Linux or Unix could come in the door, and then with a little bit of self-study on top of the stuff that we talk about, they should be able to go back and pass the exam. So yeah, thanks for taking the time to watch. I hope this was useful for you guys. If anybody's curious, the presentation software that I was using is Slidey. You can use Pandoc and just generate Markdown to Slidey and a whole bunch of other formats. But Slidey is nice because it's completely cross-platform. It just runs at a a web browser, so you don't need to worry about PowerPoint and stuff like that. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hope this was useful. I think this got a little bit longer than I was expecting it to get, but just wanted to sort of let people know that I'm going to have that kind of course out at some point in the not too distant future, and I'll have some kind of, you know, info about how you can go get it and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I think for a lot of you guys, especially people who are really new to this, it could actually be a fairly interesting thing. And the nice stuff about this is that also this is a basis for probably what will be a further expansion on that, which will be the next version where I take a lot of this courseware and add on to it and sort of make an LPI 101 or sort of a basic junior Linux admin. Like, this is what you need to know. You know, talk about DNS servers and talk about setting up Samba and setting up, you know, joining to an AD domain and Kerberos and, you know, all the kind of stuff that one would expect in a class like that. So yeah, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, go ahead and click the like button. And, you know, if you haven't subscribed already and you feel like it, do that. If you get a good name for the course, feel free to pipe in with a suggestion. I appreciate hearing from you, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching.